March 8, 2024, when luxury hotel manager Brad Whitmore grabbed scissors and cut off chunks of a black woman's hair as a harmless prank in front of laughing guests. He had no idea he'd just destroyed his own career in the most spectacular way possible. But what he didn't know was, who was this woman really? And why did his face turn ghost white the moment she pulled out her phone? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog was just lifting off San Francisco Bay when an unmarked silver sedan pulled into the curved driveway of the Grandeur Pacific Hotel. The building's Art Deco facade gleamed in the early light, its brass fixtures polished to perfection and doormen stationed like sentries in their burgundy uniforms. From the back seat emerged Keisha Reynolds, dressed deliberately plain in dark jeans, a simple black sweater and white sneakers. Her natural hair was styled in beautiful box braids that fell past her shoulders, adorned with small golden cuffs. She carried only a canvas tote bag and a worn leather backpack, nothing that screamed wealth or status. "Remember, Thomas?" she said to her driver, a grey-haired black man in his 60s who'd been with her for over a decade. "You don't know me. If anyone asks, you're just an Uber driver." Thomas nodded, concern etched across his weathered face. "Miss Reynolds, are you absolutely sure about this? These undercover visits, they're getting more dangerous. Last time in Seattle, we discovered systematic wage theft affecting 200 employees. Keisha interrupted gently but firmly. "Pick me up at 7 tonight, not a minute earlier." She stepped out before he could protest further. Thomas watched her disappear through the revolving doors, then pulled away slowly, worry gnawing at his gut. In 20 years of working for the Reynolds family, he'd learned that when Keisha got that look in her eyes, that quiet, determined focus, something significant was about to happen. Inside, the Grandeur Pacific's lobby was a masterpiece of old-world luxury meeting modern sophistication. Marble columns reached toward coffered ceilings. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across plush seating areas arranged around a magnificent fountain. Everything whispered wealth, exclusivity, and privilege. But Keisha's trained eye saw beyond the surface beauty. She noticed the composition of the staff immediately. Every person in a management uniform or guest-facing role was white. The housekeeping staff she glimpsed pushing carts down a side hallway, predominantly black, Latina, and Asian. The maintenance worker fixing a light fixture near the elevators. Pacific Islander working quickly with his eyes down, almost invisible. At the front desk, a young woman named Jennifer Chen looked up with a professional smile. Her name tag read Front Desk Associate, and her demeanor was warm, though Keisha detected a slight weariness around her eyes. "Good morning. Welcome to the Grandeur Pacific. How may I assist you today?" "I have a reservation," Keisha said, sliding a credit card across the marble counter. "Under Reynolds." "Keisha Reynolds." Jennifer's fingers moved across the keyboard, then paused. Her eyes flicked toward the manager's office behind the desk, then back to her screen. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Miss Reynolds, I just want to give you a heads up. Our general manager, Mr. Whitmore, he's been in a particular mood this week. There was an incident yesterday with a guest, and he's been hyper-focused on what he calls maintaining property standards." Jennifer's voice dropped even lower. "Just thought you should know." Keisha's expression remained neutral, but internally, her antenna went up. This was exactly the kind of information she'd come to investigate. The corporate office of Pacific Luxury Hotels, the company she'd inherited from her late father 3 years ago, had been receiving anonymous complaints about the Grandeur Pacific for months. But complaints were vague, HR reports sanitized, and the hotel's numbers looked perfect on paper. Sometimes, her father used to say, you have to see the disease with your own eyes before you can cure it. "I appreciate the warning," Keisha said, accepting her keycard. "That's very kind of you." As Jennifer processed the check-in, Keisha observed the dynamics around her. A well-dressed white couple approached the concierge desk and were greeted with immediate, enthusiastic attention. A minute later, a Latino family with two small children approached the same desk and waited nearly 5 minutes before anyone acknowledged them. Near the elevator bank, two front desk associates were having a hushed conversation. Keisha positioned herself close enough to overhear without being obvious. "Did you see the email Brad sent last night?" A young white woman whispered to her colleague, a black woman in her 30s. "The one about professional presentation standards." "Girl, I've worked here for 6 years. My presentation has never been an issue until he showed up 18 months ago," he wrote Darnell again. "Third time this month. For what?" His locks said they were unkempt and not aligned with brand image. Meanwhile, Chris comes in with bedhead half the week, and Brad just laughs about it. The black woman shook her head bitterly. "I've got applications out at 4 other hotels. I can't do this much longer." The elevator doors opened, and Keisha stepped inside, her mind already cataloguing the warning signs. In her room on the 14th floor, a junior suite with a view of the bay, she set up her laptop on the desk and logged into the secure executive portal that only 3 people in the entire company could access. The data that populated her screen was damning in its patterns, even if no single number screamed disaster. Employee turnover at the Grandeur Pacific, 34% annually, compared to a company average of 19%. Minority employee retention, 47% stayed less than 1 year. Customer satisfaction scores showed an unusual trend. Reviews from guests of color were consistently lower, with specific mentions of unwelcoming atmosphere and felt uncomfortable. But what really caught her attention were the HR incident reports that had been filed in the past year. 12 formal complaints about Brad Whitmore's management style. 4 specifically mentioned discriminatory comments about appearance, with 3 of those 4 involving hair. All had been marked resolved internally with no further details. Her phone buzzed. A text from Linda Martinez, Pacific Luxury Hotels' Chief Human Resources Officer and one of only 2 people who knew Keisha was in San Francisco. "Linda, board meeting scheduled for 6 p.m. your time. They're pushing for a decision on the Whitmore situation. Legal department is nervous about liability exposure if we don't act soon. Keisha, I need to see it for myself. Give me today, Linda. Be careful." His last performance review noted strong personality and difficulty accepting criticism. That's HR code for potential problem. Keisha. Noted, Keisha changed out of her travel clothes and into even more casual attire. Yoga pants, an oversized Howard University sweatshirt, and comfortable slides. She removed the small diamond studs from her ears and the elegant watch from her wrist. She wanted to blend in, to be invisible, to see how the hotel truly operated when they thought nobody important was watching. She pulled out a blank notebook and a pen, grabbed her laptop, and headed back downstairs. Her plan was simple. Work in the lobby for a few hours, observe the operations, maybe strike up conversations with staff during their breaks. She'd done this same routine at 17 other properties over the past 2 years, and it had revealed problems that never appeared in official reports. As she settled into a comfortable armchair near the floor-to-ceiling windows, positioning herself with a view of both the front desk and the main lobby traffic, Keisha had no idea that her simple decision to work in the public space would trigger a confrontation that would change not just her life, but the entire hospitality industry. Across the lobby, behind his office door, Brad Whitmore was reviewing the day's occupancy reports and checking his reflection in a small mirror he kept in his desk. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to reflect his vision of what the Grandeur Pacific should be, and he was about to spot something in his lobby that, in his mind, didn't belong. The clock on the wall read 10:47 a.m. In 13 minutes. Everything would change. At 11 TTM, the Grandeur Pacific lobby buzzed with the quiet energy of a Thursday morning. Business travelers sat scattered across the seating areas, typing on laptops and making phone calls. A tour group gathered near the concierge desk, studying maps of Fisherman's Wharf. Elderly couples lingered over complimentary coffee and pastries at the lobby cafe. Keisha had been working peacefully for the past 15 minutes, reviewing financial reports on her laptop while occasionally observing the flow of guests and staff. She'd already noticed 3 separate instances where minority guests received noticeably slower service than their white counterparts. Though nothing overt enough to call out directly, she was so focused on a spreadsheet, showing suspicious payroll discrepancies, that she didn't notice Brad Whitmore emerging from his office until his shadow fell across her keyboard. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was smooth, professionally courteous, but carried an unmistakable edge of authority. Keisha looked up to find a man in his early 40s standing over her, arms crossed. He wore an impeccably tailored navy suit, his sandy brown hair styled with precision, and his blue eyes held the cold assessment of someone used to being obeyed without question. Behind him stood a tall, muscular Latino man in a security uniform. His name tag read, Carlos Mendoza, Security Supervisor, and unlike Brad's confident posture, Carlos looked distinctly uncomfortable, his jaw tight and his eyes avoiding direct contact with Keisha. "Good morning," Keisha replied calmly, closing her laptop slightly but not entirely. "Is there something I can help you with?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Brad's eyes swept over her deliberately, taking in her casual clothes, her natural hair, her lack of expensive accessories. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a subtle tightening around his mouth that Keisha recognized immediately. She'd seen that look before, the assessment, the judgment, the conclusion that she didn't belong in this space. "I'm Brad Whitmore, general manager of this property," he said, pulling out his business card and placing it on the table beside her with a sharp tap. "We've had some concerns about unauthorized individuals using our lobby facilities. I'm going to need to see your room key and a valid photo ID." Keisha glanced around the lobby with deliberate slowness. At least 8 other guests sat with laptops open, connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi. A woman in athletic wear lounged on a sofa with her phone. A man in rumpled khakis worked at a corner table, papers spread everywhere. 2 college-aged guests sat cross-legged on the floor near an outlet, charging their devices and laughing at something on a tablet. Every single one of them was white. Not one had been approached by management. "I see several other guests working in the lobby," Keisha said, her voice level and professional. "Are you checking everyone's credentials or just mine?" Brad's face flushed slightly, but his smile remained fixed. "We conduct random security checks to ensure the safety and exclusivity of our guests. This is a luxury property with premium amenities, and we have a responsibility to verify that everyone present is actually staying with us." "Random," Keisha repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "That's correct." Brad gestured toward her laptop. "Our Wi-Fi is for registered guests only. Theft of services is a serious matter. Additionally, we've had issues with people claiming to be guests when they're actually using our facilities without authorization." Carlos shifted his weight from foot to foot, his discomfort becoming more obvious. He cleared his throat softly. "Sir, maybe we could just verify through the front desk system. We can call Jennifer." "Carlos, I'll handle this." Brad cut him off sharply. "Your job is to stand here and provide security presence. Let me do mine." The sharpness in Brad's tone made several nearby guests look up from their activities. Keisha noticed a middle-aged white woman at the next table lean closer to her companion and whisper something, both of them now watching the scene unfold. "I'd be happy to show you my room key," Keisha said, reaching into her bag with measured calm. "Though I'm curious about your selection process for these random security checks." She produced her key card, holding it up where Brad could see the room number printed on the sleeve, 1407. Brad took it from her hand, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny, holding it up to the light, as if checking for counterfeits. "Key cards can be stolen, owned, or purchased from previous guests," he said, handing it back to her with clear reluctance. "I'll need to see government-issued photo identification as well." That's not standard hotel policy, Keisha replied, making no move to produce her ID. Room keys are sufficient verification for accessing hotel amenities. Brad's professional mask began to slip. His voice rose slightly, drawing more attention from the surrounding area. Ma'am, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but you're making this difficult. This is my hotel, and I have the authority to verify the identity of anyone using our facilities. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time. Provide proper identification, or I'll have to ask you to leave the premises. A small crowd was beginning to form now. The woman in athletic wear had her phone out, though it wasn't clear if she was recording or just holding it. The business travelers had abandoned their work to watch. Even the tour group near the concierge desk had paused to observe the confrontation. Keisha carefully set her keycard on the table in front of her and folded her hands calmly. Mr. Whitmore, I've shown you my room key. I've been nothing but cooperative. But what I'm observing is that you've singled me out from among dozens of guests doing exactly what I'm doing. The only apparent difference is the color of my skin. The lobby seemed to collectively hold its breath. Someone gasped audibly. The whispers grew louder. Brad's face went from flushed to red. Now you hold on just a minute. This has nothing to do with... I don't appreciate you making accusations like that. This is purely a security matter. You're the one making this about race, not me. Then explain your selection criteria, Keisha said, her voice remaining maddeningly calm. What made you choose to approach me specifically? Brad sputtered, his composure cracking. It's obvious when someone doesn't, when they're not. He stopped himself, seeming to realize he was about to say something he couldn't take back. Carlos spoke up again, his voice urgent and low. Sir, I really think we should just verify through the system and move on. This is becoming a situation. Carlos, if you can't do your job properly, I'll find someone who can. Brad snapped, his voice echoing off the marble walls. The professional veneer was completely gone now, replaced by raw authority and anger. This is exactly the problem with this hotel. No backbone, no standards. Everyone's so worried about feelings that we've forgotten about maintaining the caliber of guest experience that our real clientele expects. The words hung in the air like poison. Keisha saw Carlos's face tighten with hurt and anger. Saw the moment he recognized that he was being used as a prop in Brad's power play. Saw the internal calculation of a man who needed his job, but was being forced to participate in something fundamentally wrong. Carlos, Keisha said gently, looking directly at the security supervisor. You don't have to do this. I can see you know this isn't right. For a moment, Carlos looked like he might agree with her, might step away from Brad's side. But then his eyes dropped to his wedding ring, and Keisha understood. He had people depending on him, bills to pay, a family to support. The luxury of moral stands wasn't something everyone could afford. I'm sorry, Carlos said quietly, so quietly that only Keisha and Brad could hear him. I have 3 kids, Keisha nodded. I understand. Brad, sensing that he was losing control of the situation and not understanding the quiet exchange between Keisha and Carlos, made a decision that would seal his fate. He straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and addressed the growing crowd of onlookers with renewed confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption to your morning. We at the Grandeur Pacific take security very seriously, and sometimes that means dealing with uncomfortable situations. He turned back to Keisha with cold finality. Ma'am, you have 2 options. Come with me to the front desk for proper verification, or gather your belongings and leave the property immediately. Those are your only choices, the crowd murmured. Someone said, This is crazy. Another voice added, Someone should call corporate. Keisha stood slowly, gracefully, with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to reveal. She gathered her laptop, her notebook, and her bag with deliberate calm. I'll come to the front desk, she said simply. Brad smiled, a tight, triumphant smile that said he'd won. He gestured toward the front desk with exaggerated courtesy, like a king granting permission to approach his throne. As they walked across the lobby, Brad in front, Keisha in the middle, Carlos trailing behind like a reluctant executioner, Phones came out. Guest recorded openly now, sensing that something significant was unfolding. What Brad Whitmore didn't know was that he hadn't won anything. He'd just walked directly into a trap of his own making, and the woman he'd humiliated was about to show him exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. The walk to the front desk felt like a perp walk, though Keisha was the victim, not the criminal. Every eye in the lobby tracked their movement across the marble floor. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Her child pointed until his mother gently pushed his hand down. The fountain's bubbling water seemed suddenly too loud in the heavy silence. Jennifer Chen's face drained of color when she saw the approaching trio. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled up the reservation system, already knowing what she would find, but hoping somehow she was wrong about what was happening. "Jennifer," Brad said with exaggerated patience, as if speaking to a child, "please pull up the reservation for this guest and verify her identity through our system." "Mr. Whitmore." "I already checked her in this morning," Jennifer said carefully, her eyes darting to Keisha with an apology written across her face. "Ms. Reynolds, room 1407, everything was in order." "I'm aware of what you did this morning," Brad interrupted, his tone making it clear that he considered her competence questionable. "However, given the current situation and this guest's resistance to standard security protocols, I need you to verify her information again. Out loud, please, so everyone can hear that we follow proper procedures." Jennifer's fingers moved across the keyboard with visible reluctance. "Keisha Reynolds. Check-in date, March 8th. Check-out date, March 9th. Room 1407, Junior Suite. Reservation made through the Pacific Luxury Hotels corporate portal with executive rate code PLXEC01. Brad's eyes narrowed at the executive rate code, but he pushed forward. "And what credit card is on file?" "Mr. Whitmore, I don't think it's appropriate to announce financial information publicly." "What? Credit card?" Brad repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. Jennifer swallowed hard. "American Express Centurion." A ripple went through the growing crowd. "The Black Amex card, invitation only, requiring hundreds of thousands in annual spending. Not the card of someone who couldn't afford a hotel room, but Brad was too far into his performance to back down now. He leaned over the counter, studying the screen with theatrical intensity, as if searching for some flaw in the record that would justify his actions. "Well," he finally said, straightening up, "the reservation appears to be legitimate, as I told you it would be," Keisha said quietly. Brad turned to face her, and something ugly flickered across his features. This should have been the moment where he apologized, backed down, retreated to his office with whatever dignity he could salvage. Instead, his pride and something darker, something that had been lurking beneath his professional surface, took control. "However," Brad announced, his voice carrying across the lobby like a proclamation, "there's still the matter of appropriate presentation in our public spaces." The crowd shifted. Someone whispered, "Oh no, don't!" Brad walked slowly around Keisha in a circle like a shark assessing prey. "The Grandeur Pacific has always maintained certain standards of appearance and decorum. Our guests expect to be surrounded by refinement and elegance." He stopped directly in front of her, looking pointedly at her box braids. "Your current appearance, while perhaps suitable for other environments, doesn't align with the sophisticated atmosphere we cultivate here." Audible gasps echoed through the lobby. A woman near the elevators said loudly, "Is he seriously—" "I'm talking about professionalism," Brad continued, his voice rising defensively. "Look around this lobby. Everyone else has taken care to present themselves appropriately. Neat, polished, refined." He gestured at a blonde woman in designer yoga wear who looked mortified to be included in his example. "Even in casual attire, there's a level of grooming that shows respect for the environment." "Mr. Whitmore," Carlos said urgently, finding his voice despite the risk. "Sir, I think we should step into your office and discuss this privately. What I'm discussing," Brad said, cutting him off with a sharp gesture, "is that this hotel has a reputation to maintain." And part of that reputation is ensuring that our public spaces reflect a certain aesthetic standard. He looked directly at Keisha's braids again. Your hair, while I'm sure it's culturally significant to you, is simply too distracting, too unprofessional for our lobby environment. The lobby erupted. Multiple guests were recording openly now, phones raised high. Someone shouted, "This is discrimination." Another voice yelled, "I'm posting this everywhere." Jennifer had both hands over her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. Two other front desk associates had emerged from the back office, both women of color, both staring at Brad with expressions of shock and recognition. They'd heard variations of this speech before, delivered privately in his office. Keisha stood perfectly still, her face a mask of calm that belied the fury building inside her. But she needed him to go further. She needed him to cross the line so completely that there would be no ambiguity, no room for lawyers to spin this into a misunderstanding. "What exactly are you suggesting I do about my hair, Mr. Whitmore?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly through the silent lobby. Brad's eyes lit up with an idea, the kind of terrible inspiration that comes to men who have never faced real consequences for their actions. He turned to Jennifer with a snap of his fingers. "Jennifer, we keep scissors at the desk for package services, correct?" Jennifer's response came out as barely a whisper. "Yes, but Mr. Whitmore, bring them here." "Sir, I can't." "That's an order, Jennifer. Bring me the scissors now or start looking for another job." The threat hung in the air, like a blade. Jennifer looked at Keisha, looked at the crowd, looked back at Brad. Her whole body was shaking as she reached under the counter and withdrew a pair of professional-grade scissors with 8-inch blades, the kind designed for cutting through tough packaging materials. Her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped them as she placed them on the counter. Brad picked up the scissors with a flourish, holding them up for everyone to see. "Since you're clearly unwilling to address this issue yourself, I'll help you fix this little problem right now. Think of it as complimentary grooming services." He smiled, a horrible, self-satisfied smile that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A prank, if you will. Something to laugh about later. "You will not touch my hair," Keisha said, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. "Ma'am, you have two choices," Brad replied, opening and closing the scissors with deliberate menace. The metal whispered with each movement, a sound that seemed to echo off the marble walls. "You can sit in that chair," he pointed to one of the lobby's elegant accent chairs, "and let me fix this situation quickly and painlessly. Or you can leave this hotel immediately and never return. Those are your options." A distinguished-looking older black man in an expensive suit stepped forward from the crowd. "Young lady, don't let him do this. I'm an attorney and this is assault." "You have every right to refuse." "She'll leave then," Brad announced triumphantly. "Carlos, please escort this guest to her room to collect her belongings, then off the property." Carlos looked physically ill. "Sir, please, this isn't right. We can't." "Do your job, Carlos, or clean out your locker today." "Your choice." Keisha watched Carlos's face crumble, watched him calculate the cost of resistance against the weight of his responsibilities. She made a decision at that moment that surprised everyone, including herself. "I'll sit," she said calmly. The lobby exploded with protests. "Don't do it." "Call the police." "Someone stop this." But Keisha raised her hand, and something in her bearing made the crowd fall silent. She walked to the chair Brad had indicated and sat down with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes forward. To anyone watching, she looked almost serene, like someone waiting for a spa service rather than a humiliation. "Recording this," someone called out. "Everyone's recording." "Good," Brad said, apparently believing that the documentation would somehow vindicate his actions rather than condemn them. "Let this be a lesson in standards." He approached Keisha from behind, scissors in hand. The crowd pressed closer, phones raised, unable to look away from the horror unfolding before them. Carlos had tears running down his face. "Please don't make me watch this," he whispered. "Then leave," Brad snapped. "But if you walk out that door, don't come back." Carlos stayed. Though every second cost him a piece of his soul, Brad reached for the first braid, his fingers touching Keisha's hair without permission, without consent, with only the absolute certainty of his own authority. The scissors opened with a metallic whisper. Keisha closed her eyes and took a slow breath. She was ready. The first braid fell to the marble floor with a soft sound that might have been insignificant. If it weren't the sound of a man destroying his entire future, Brad Whitmore had just made the worst mistake of his life. And he still didn't know it. The second braid fell. Then the third. Brad worked with disturbing enthusiasm, cutting through Keisha's carefully maintained braids as if he were trimming hedges. Each severed section dropped to the marble floor, creating a growing pile of dark hair decorated with golden cuffs that caught the light from the chandeliers above. "There," Brad announced after the fifth cut, stepping back to admire his handiwork. Keisha's hair was now jagged and uneven, several braids intact, while others were brutally shortened, creating a chaotic, humiliating appearance. "Much better. Now you look appropriate for a property of this caliber." The crowd stood frozen in collective horror. Some people were openly crying. Others had their phones raised so high, their arms shook from the strain of holding position. The fountain continued its cheerful bubbling, grotesquely out of place in the moment. Keisha sat perfectly still for 3 long seconds, her breathing calm and measured. Then she reached down and carefully picked up one of the severed braids from the floor, examining it with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying a specimen. "Are you finished?" she asked, her voice carrying an odd note that Brad was too self-satisfied to recognize as dangerous. Brad wiped the scissors on a cloth napkin from a nearby coffee station, then set them on the front desk counter with a decisive click. "With your makeover?" "Yes, I believe that does the job perfectly." "Good," Keisha said, reaching into her bag. "Because now it's my turn." She pulled out her phone, and the screen that illuminated made Jennifer gasp so loudly that several people turned to look at her, before turning back to stare at what Keisha was displaying. The phone screen showed a corporate portal in crisp, clear detail: Pacific Luxury Hotels, Executive Command Center, CEO access only. Below that, a profile photo and name: Dr. Keisha M. Reynolds, Chief Executive Officer. "Wait," Brad said, his triumphant smile beginning to falter. "What is that?" Keisha stood slowly, turning to face him fully. She tapped her phone screen and it began to ring. The call connected on the first ring, the voice on the other end crisp and professional, loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear through the lobby's perfect acoustics. "Linda Martinez, Chief Human Resources Officer." "What's your emergency, Dr. Reynolds?" The lobby erupted. People shouted in disbelief. Someone screamed, "Oh my God!" Another voice yelled, "That's Keisha Reynolds!" "That's the CEO." Brad's face went from confident to confused to horrified in the span of 3 seconds. The color drained from his skin so rapidly he swayed on his feet. No, you're just some..." "Linda," Keisha said calmly into her phone, her eyes never leaving Brad's face. "I need you to implement Protocol 9 at the Grandeur Pacific Hotel, effective immediately. Authorization code, Reynolds Kilo 77 Alpha. Confirmed," Linda's voice came through. "All business now." "Protocol 9 activated. Are you safe, Dr. Reynolds?" "I'm unharmed, though I'll need the contact information for our attorneys. We have a criminal assault captured on multiple devices by numerous witnesses." Brad staggered backward, reaching for the front desk counter to steady himself. "This can't be happening. You set me up. You came here dressed like, looking like. This is entrapment." Keisha walked toward him slowly, each step deliberate. The crowd parted like water, creating a path. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough for him to see every detail of her professional bearing, despite her casual clothes. Close enough for him to understand the magnitude of his mistake. "Let me properly introduce myself. Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent lobby. "Dr. Keisha Marie Reynolds. I hold a doctorate in business administration from Stanford and an MBA from Harvard. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Pacific Luxury Hotels, a position I inherited from my father, Marcus Reynolds. who built this company from a single property in Atlanta 40 years ago. She held up her phone, showing her corporate identification clearly displayed on the screen. Official photo, full credentials, access codes that only the highest level of company leadership possessed. I own this hotel, Keisha continued, her voice calm but implacable. I own 43 others just like it across 12 states. I employ over 18,000 people. My company generates $2.4 billion in annual revenue. Brad opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His hands were shaking violently now. And you, Keisha said, looking at him with something that might have been pity if it weren't for the ruined braids still lying at her feet, just committed assault and battery against me, on camera in my own lobby, in front of approximately 60 witnesses. The crowd had swelled to nearly 100 people now. Guests from the upper floors had come down via the elevators, drawn by text messages and social media posts from people in the lobby. Hotel staff had abandoned their posts to witness the confrontation. Someone had propped open the front door, and people from the street were craning their necks to see inside. "Dr. Reynolds," Jennifer said, tears streaming down her face. "I am so sorry. I should have said something. I should have stopped him." "Jennifer Chen," Keisha said warmly, turning to the young woman who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "You did absolutely nothing wrong. In fact, your warning this morning was exactly what I needed to hear." She looked back at Brad. "Linda, are you still on the line?" "I'm here," Linda's voice confirmed. Effective immediately, Brad Whitmore's employment with Pacific Luxury Hotels is terminated with cause. All access to company systems, property and facilities is revoked as of this moment. I want him escorted from the building by security within the next 15 minutes, with no access to his office except under supervised conditions to collect only personal items. "Understood," Linda said. "I'm already processing the termination paperwork. Security protocol for executive removal has been initiated." Brad finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled rasp. "You can't do this. I have rights. I have a contract. I'll sue you for wrongful termination. Your contract includes a morality clause and zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and harassment," Keisha interrupted. "You violated both spectacularly." She gestured to the phone, still recording. "In front of more witnesses than most criminal trials have, and with more video evidence than prosecutors usually dream of." Carlos stepped forward, his face still wet with tears, but his voice steady now. "Dr. Reynolds, I'm so deeply sorry. I should have refused. I should have walked out. I needed this job, but that's no excuse." "Carlos Mendoza," Keisha said gently, "you're not terminated. In fact, I watched you resist as much as you could while trying to protect your family. That took courage." Carlos looked stunned. "But I participated. I helped him. You were coerced under threat of termination. That's a very different situation, and I understand the position you were in." She turned back to Brad. "But there's more, isn't there, Mr. Whitmore? This wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment." She tapped her phone again, pulling up files she'd been reviewing all morning. "In the past 18 months under your management, this hotel has had 12 formal HR complaints filed against you. 8 involved discriminatory treatment of minority employees. 4 specifically mentioned inappropriate comments about appearance and hair." Brad's lawyer instincts kicked in, even through his shock. "Those were all resolved, settled, closed matters, buried matters," Keisha corrected. "Handled locally without escalation to corporate HR as required by company policy. You've been systematically discriminating against employees and guests and using your position to suppress complaints before they reached anyone who could stop you." She swiped to another document. "Employee turnover under your management, 34% annually. Company average, 19%. Minority employee retention, 47% don't make it past 1 year. Want to guess what the pattern looks like?" The crowd murmured. Many people recording not just the confrontation now, but also the data Keisha was sharing. "This is also why I'm here today," Keisha continued. "We've been receiving anonymous complaints for months. Staff members were too afraid to use their names because they knew you'd retaliate. Guests who felt uncomfortable but couldn't articulate why. The data showed a pattern, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. She gestured to the braids on the floor. I never expected you'd hand me assault charges on a silver platter. Brad's face had gone from white to grey. He looked around wildly, as if searching for an escape route or an ally, but found only hostile faces and recording devices. The security team from our San Jose office is en route. Linda's voice came through the phone again. Eat at 12 minutes. Local police have been notified per your standing instructions for Protocol 9. They're sending officers to take statements and collect evidence. Perfect, Keisha said. Then she raised her voice to address the entire lobby. To all the guests present, Pacific Luxury Hotels sincerely apologizes for what you've witnessed today. Your stays will be fully comped, and you'll each receive a voucher for a complimentary 3-night stay at any of our properties. We value you as witnesses to injustice and as allies in change. The crowd broke into spontaneous applause. And to the staff members present, Keisha continued, her voice gentler now, an investigation will be launched immediately. If any of you have experienced discrimination, harassment, or retaliation under Mr. Whitmore's management, I want to hear from you. You will be protected, you will be believed, and there will be accountability. More applause, this time mixed with relieved crying from several staff members. Brad made one last desperate attempt. This is a witch hunt. You're destroying my career. Over one mistake, Keisha's voice cut like a blade. You physically assaulted me. You violated my bodily autonomy. You humiliated me in public based on racist assumptions about what professional looks like. And you did it all while believing you were untouchable because you thought I was powerless. She picked up one of the severed braids from the floor, holding it up. This braid took 4 hours to install. These golden cuffs were a gift from my father before he died. You didn't just cut my hair, Mr. Whitmore. You violated my dignity, my heritage, and my humanity. The silence was absolute. And now, Keisha said quietly, you're going to face every single consequence of your actions. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Brad Whitmore's reign of terror was over. 72 hours after the lobby incident, the conference room at Pacific Luxury Hotel's San Francisco regional headquarters looked like the nerve center of a military operation. Whiteboards covered every wall, filled with timelines, organizational charts, and color-coded incident reports. 3 separate laptop stations processed incoming data, while a dedicated team of attorneys, HR specialists, and forensic accountants worked around the clock. Linda Martinez stood at the head of the conference table, dark circles under her eyes from 3 consecutive nights of minimal sleep. Spread before her were documents that painted a picture far more disturbing than anyone had initially imagined. It's systemic, she told Keisha, who sat reviewing depositions from employees who had finally found the courage to come forward. What happened to you in that lobby wasn't an aberration. It was standard operating procedure. She pulled up a demographic analysis on the main screen. The data visualization showed employment patterns at the Grandeur Pacific over the past 18 months, Brad's entire tenure as general manager. When Brad arrived, management positions were 62% white, 38% minority, Linda explained, highlighting the timeline. Within 6 months, that shifted to 79% white. Within a year, 87%. He systematically pushed out every minority manager he inherited and replaced them with white employees. Keisha studied the chart, her jaw tight. Show me the promotion data. Linda clicked to the next screen. This is where it gets really ugly. Minority employees with identical qualifications, identical performance metrics, and identical tenure were promoted at 1/5 the rate of white employees. She pointed to specific examples. Darnell Williams, front desk supervisor, 6 years with the company, outstanding performance reviews, hospitality management degree from Cornell, applied for assistant manager position 4 times, rejected each time. Let me guess, Keisha said. Brad hired someone with less experience. Worse, he created a new position called Guest Experience Coordinator and hired his former college roommate, a white man with no hotel experience, at a higher salary than the assistant manager position would have paid. The forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Wong, pushed a thick binder across the table. The financial irregularities go deeper than discriminatory hiring. Brad was running a 2-tier contractor system. She opened the binder to reveal highlighted invoices and payment records. Vendors owned by minorities were consistently charged 20 to 35% more than white-owned vendors for identical services. Cleaning supplies, maintenance services, food vendors. The pattern is undeniable. Keisha flipped through the pages, her anger building with each fraudulent invoice. How much money are we talking about? Over the 18 months of his management, approximately $340,000 in inflated charges to minority-owned businesses, Patricia said. But here's the really insidious part. He structured it so the minority vendors thought they were getting the standard rate. He was actually negotiating deep discounts with white-owned vendors and pocketing kickbacks. Kickbacks? Keisha looked up sharply. Patricia pulled out bank statements. We subpoenaed Brad's personal financial records. Deposits totaling $67,000 from various vendor accounts over the past year. He wasn't just discriminating, he was profiting from it. Linda opened another file, this one marked HR complaints, sealed records. We found the buried complaints. Brad had an arrangement with a local employment attorney named Richard Foster, who specialized in making problems disappear quietly. She spread out a series of settlement agreements across the table. Each one was stamped confidential in red ink. Each one required the complainant to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and each one was categorized in the accounting books as general business expense rather than discrimination settlement. Shanice Johnson, housekeeping supervisor, Linda read from the first file, filed a complaint after Brad told her that her natural hair made guests uncomfortable and suggested she wear a wig or find another job. Settled for $35,000. Marcus Chen, night auditor, filed a complaint after Brad made repeated comments about his exotic appearance and asked invasive questions about his background. Settled for $28,000. Gabriela Ruiz, restaurant manager, filed a complaint after Brad told her that her accent was too thick for guest interactions and demoted her to kitchen supervisor. Settled for $55,000. Keisha's hands clenched into fists. How many total? 14 sealed settlements in 18 months, Linda said quietly. Total payout, $487,000. Every single one involving discrimination. Every single one buried in routine operating expenses. None of them escalated to corporate HR as required by company policy. A young attorney named Michael Foster, no relation to the employment lawyer, raised his hand. We found Brad's email correspondence with Richard Foster. They had a system. Any complaint that came in would be immediately classified as a personnel matter requiring local resolution. Brad would build a paper trail of minor infractions against the complainant, then offer a settlement in exchange for their resignation and an NDA. He pulled up email exchanges on his laptop. This one is from 8 months ago. Brad writes, another problem employee making noise about discrimination. Standard protocol. Document everything. Make the workplace uncomfortable. Offer them money to leave quietly. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the calculated cruelty of the system Brad had built, but the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Carlos Mendoza had provided security footage that Brad didn't know existed. The grandeur. Pacific had upgraded its surveillance system 7 months earlier, adding high-definition cameras with audio recording capabilities in all public areas. Brad had been briefed on the old system, but never told about the enhanced coverage. "We have everything," said the hotel's IT director, James Park, pulling up video files on the main screen. Every discriminatory comment, every time he followed a minority guest, every confrontation with employees. The cameras caught it all. He played a clip from 3 months earlier. Brad stood in the lobby, watching a well-dressed black couple approach the front desk. His voice came through clearly on the audio. "Jennifer, check their credit card authorization carefully. Those two look like they might have payment issues." Another clip showed Brad pulling aside a young Latina front desk associate. "Maria, I need you to work in the back office during the convention next week. We want a certain image for our guests, and your look doesn't quite fit what we're going for." A third clip caught Brad having a conversation with his assistant manager, a white man named Trevor, about hiring decisions. "I'm not saying we discriminate," Brad's voice said clearly. "I'm just saying we need to be strategic about who represents our brand. Cultural fit matters. You understand what I mean?" Trevor's response, "Absolutely. Keep the diversity numbers legal, but make sure the guest-facing positions maintain the right image." "How much footage do we have?" Keisha asked. "Over 200 hours of problematic interactions," James replied. "And that's just what we've reviewed so far." Linda pulled up another document. This one marked anonymous employee survey results. After news of the lobby incident went viral, we sent out an anonymous survey to all Grandeur Pacific employees. We got a 93% response. Rate, she displayed the results. Of minority employees reported experiencing or witnessing discriminatory behavior, 91%, said they were afraid to report problems due to fear of retaliation. 64% had considered quitting specifically. Because of Brad's management, 23% had actually begun job searching at other hotels. The written responses are even more heartbreaking, Linda said, pulling up a selection of anonymous comments. "I was told my locks were unprofessional and I needed to cut them or work in housekeeping where guests wouldn't see me. My manager said I was too diverse for the front desk and moved me to night shift maintenance. When a guest called me a racial slur. Brad told me I was being oversensitive and needed to develop thicker skin for hospitality work. I watched 3 qualified black employees get passed over for promotions while less experienced white employees got promoted within months." Patricia pulled out another file, this one containing payroll analysis. The discrimination extended to compensation. Minority employees in equivalent positions earned on average $370 less per hour than white employees. Over a year, that's nearly $8,000 per employee in lost wages. She highlighted specific examples. Darnell Williams and Trevor Matthews both worked as front desk supervisors with similar tenure. Trevor earned $24.50 per hour. Darnell earned $19.75. When Darnell requested a raise to match Trevor's rate, Brad wrote in the denial, "Current compensation appropriate for position and performance level." The IT team had also recovered Brad's deleted emails, messages he thought he'd erased permanently from the company servers. James pulled up a particularly damning thread. This email chain is from 14 months ago. Brad is corresponding with the regional director about diversity initiatives mandated by corporate. The email read, "These diversity quotas are getting ridiculous. We're a luxury property, not a social experiment. I'll meet the minimum numbers in back-of-house positions, but I'm not putting anyone who doesn't fit our image in guest-facing roles. If corporate pushes back, I'll just document performance issues to justify the hiring decisions." Another recovered email showed Brad instructing his management team on how to avoid discrimination claims. Never put anything discriminatory in writing. Keep performance documentation vague. Use terms like cultural fit and brand alignment instead of anything that could be construed as racial. "The lawyers can't prove what we're thinking. He knew exactly what he was doing," Keisha said, her voice cold with fury. This wasn't ignorance or unconscious bias. This was calculated, systematic discrimination with legal cover. Linda nodded grimly. "And he had help." We're investigating 3 other managers who appear to have participated in the system. Trevor Matthews, the assistant manager, and 2 department heads who consistently gave lower performance reviews to minority employees. The investigation had also uncovered Brad's connections to online communities where hotel managers shared tactics for maintaining brand standards, coded language for discriminatory hiring practices. His browsing history showed regular visits to forums where managers discussed dealing with diversity, pressure, and maintaining guest comfort levels. "We have enough evidence to end his career permanently," Linda said. "Criminal charges, civil liability, industry blacklisting." But Dr. Reynolds, this goes beyond one manager. This is a system failure. Brad was able to operate this way because our oversight mechanisms failed. Keisha stood, walking to the window, overlooking San Francisco Bay. The Grandeur Pacific was visible in the distance, its Art Deco facade beautiful and corrupt in equal measure. "Then we fix the system," she said quietly. "Every policy, every procedure, every oversight mechanism, we rebuild from the ground up," she turned back to her team. "And we make sure Brad Whitmore's crimes become the catalyst for industry-wide change." The evidence was overwhelming. The pattern was undeniable. Now came the reckoning. The video went viral at 11:47 p.m. on March 8th, exactly 9 hours after Brad had cut Keisha's hair. By midnight, it had 500,000 views. By 3 a.m., over 2 million. By sunrise on March 9th, the footage had been shared across every major social media platform, generating over 15 million views and sparking a firestorm that would burn for weeks. But with visibility came danger. Keisha's home security system triggered at 4:32 a.m., jolting her awake in her Presidio Heights townhouse. Her phone lit up with alerts. Perimeter breach. Multiple intruders. Police notified. She pulled up the security camera feed on her tablet, her blood running cold. 6 figures in dark clothing and masks had scaled her front gate and were spray-painting messages across her pristine white facade. The words appeared in angry red letters: "Race beta, fake victim, you ruined a good man." But what made her hands shake was the image they'd spray-painted on her front door. A noose. San Francisco police arrived within 4 minutes, but the vandals had already fled into the pre-dawn darkness. Officer Janet Hu stood in Keisha's living room, taking notes while crime scene technicians photographed the damage outside. "Dr. Reynolds, I need to be straight with you," Officer Hu said, her expression grave. "This isn't random vandalism. Whoever did this knew your address, your security system's blind spots, and the police response time. They were in and out in under 3 minutes. That's coordination. You think this is organized?" Keisha asked, though she already knew the answer. "I think you've become a target for people who see you as a threat. The video is everywhere. You're not just a CEO anymore. You're a symbol." Officer Hu paused. "We're recommending 24-hour protection. The FBI's Civil Rights Division has already reached out. They want to investigate this as a potential hate crime with interstate implications." At Pacific Luxury Hotel's headquarters, the backlash was hitting from multiple directions. The company's stock had dropped 8% in after-hours trading as investors panicked about potential liability and brand damage. The PR department's phone lines were overwhelmed with calls from media outlets, angry customers, and threatening individuals. Linda Martinez walked into Keisha's office at 7 a.m. with her phone in hand, her face drawn with stress. "We've got problems. Multiple problems." She pulled up a news alert. "Brad's attorney held a press conference an hour ago. Jonathan Baxter. He's a high-profile defense attorney who specializes in controversial cases. He's spinning this as selective prosecution and reverse discrimination." The video played on Linda's phone. Jonathan Baxter stood at a podium outside his office, Brad lurking in the background, looking appropriately contrite. "My client made an error in judgment," Baxter said smoothly. "But let's be clear about what really happened here. Dr. Reynolds came to that hotel in disguise, deliberately presenting herself in a manner designed to provoke a reaction. This was a setup from the beginning. Entrapment orchestrated by a CEO who wanted to destroy a dedicated manager's career. A reporter shouted a question. Are you seriously arguing that cutting someone's hair without consent was appropriate? I'm arguing that my client is being held to an impossible standard while Dr. Reynolds' deceptive tactics are being ignored, Baxter replied. She violated the basic principle of good faith. She set a trap, and now she's using her considerable wealth and power to destroy a man who dedicated 15 years to the hospitality industry. Linda switched to another video. It gets worse. Brad did an interview with a conservative news network this morning. Brad sat across from a sympathetic host, his face a mask of wounded innocence. I've lost everything, he said, his voice cracking. My career, my reputation, my livelihood, all because I made one mistake while trying to enforce property standards. Meanwhile, Dr. Reynolds is being celebrated as a hero when she deliberately entrapped me. Do you think race played a role in how you've been treated? The host asked, lobbing him a softball. I think there's a double standard, Brad replied carefully. If the roles were reversed, if I had gone undercover to catch her in a mistake, I'd be vilified. But because she's a black woman and I'm a white man, the media has already decided I'm guilty. Keisha watched the clip with cold fury. He's playing the victim card. And it's working with certain audiences, Linda said grimly. She pulled up social media analytics. Look at the comment sections. It's getting ugly. The comments were a toxic mixture of support and vitriol. This CEO set him up. Total witch hunt. Brad Whitmore is a good man being destroyed by woke culture, so now hotel managers can't enforce standards without being called racist. But those comments were mild compared to the direct threats flooding Keisha's social media accounts. You destroyed that man's life. Someone should destroy yours. Watch your back. Karma's coming for you. You won't be safe anywhere. We know where you live. The cybersecurity team had flagged over 200 direct threats in the past 12 hours, with 15 classified as credible enough to warrant FBI investigation. Then the attacks expanded beyond Keisha herself. Jennifer. Jen arrived at work on March 10th to find her car's tires slashed in the hotel parking garage, spray painted on the driver's side door. Traitor! Carlos Mendoza's teenage daughter was followed home from school by a car that circled her block 3 times before driving away. Carlos immediately pulled his 3 children out of school and sent them to stay with his parents in Sacramento. Darnell Williams, the front desk supervisor who had provided testimony about discrimination, received a package at his apartment. Inside was a photocopy of his home address, his children's school information, and a note, "Drop the lawsuit or your kids will pay." The witnesses were being systematically targeted. Linda burst into Keisha's office on March 11th. We have a major problem. 3 employees who gave depositions about Brad's discrimination have now recanted their statements. They're claiming they were pressured by corporate to make false accusations. That's not possible, Keisha said. We have corroborating evidence, I know, but they're scared. One of them, Shanice Johnson, called me crying this morning. Someone sent photos to her house, pictures of her 8-year-old son at his soccer practice. The photos were taken from close range. There was a note saying they'd been watching him for days. Keisha felt sick. This has gone beyond Brad. He doesn't have the resources or connections to orchestrate this. Linda nodded. FBI agrees. They think he's got backing from an organized group. They found communications between Brad and members of a network called Business Leaders for Merit. Sounds innocuous, but it's actually a coalition of executives who oppose diversity initiatives. They've been using Brad's case as a rallying cry against what they call corporate overreach. The FBI investigation had uncovered troubling connections. Brad had been in contact with Marcus Thornton, a wealthy hotel investor who had been quietly funding legal defenses for managers accused of discrimination. Thornton saw Brad's case as an opportunity to push back against corporate diversity programs. Special Agent William Chen briefed Keisha in a secure conference room. Mr. Thornton has deep pockets and deeper connections. He's been funding a network of attorneys, PR firms, and private investigators to support Brad's defense and discredit your investigation. He showed her financial records. In the past 72 hours, Thornton's foundation has paid $250,000 to Brad's legal team, $100,000 to a crisis PR firm, and an undisclosed amount to private investigators who've been digging into your personal and professional history. Looking for what? Keisha asked. Anything they can use to discredit you. Failed business deals, personal scandals, controversial statements, anything to shift the narrative from Brad's assault to questions about your credibility. The media pressure intensified. Conservative outlets ran stories questioning Keisha's motives. Was CEO's undercover visit legal? Asked one headline. Hotel manager's life destroyed. When does justice become revenge? Read another. Cable news became a battleground. Pundits debated whether Keisha had the right to conduct undercover investigations of her own properties. Legal analysts discussed whether Brad's actions, while inappropriate, rose to the level of criminal assault. Every night, the story dominated news cycles, with Americans taking sides in what had become a proxy war over race, power, and accountability. Pacific Luxury Hotel's corporate office was besieged. Protesters gathered outside headquarters, some supporting Keisha, others demanding Brad's reinstatement. The two groups faced off across police barricades, shouting at each other while news cameras captured every confrontation. Then came the leak that threatened to derail everything. On March 12th, confidential employee statements from the investigation appeared on a right-wing news website. Names, addresses, phone numbers, and detailed testimonies of every person who had come forward about Brad's discrimination were suddenly public. Within hours, those employees began receiving threatening calls and messages. Two had bricks thrown through their windows. One found a dead rat nailed to her door with a note. "Rats get what they deserve." Linda's voice shook when she called Keisha. "People are withdrawing their testimonies. They're terrified." Without their statements, our case against Brad gets weaker. His legal team is already filing motions to dismiss criminal charges based on lack of credible witnesses. Keisha sat in her office, looking out at the San Francisco skyline, feeling the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. Her fight for justice was putting innocent people in danger. Brad's supporters were winning through intimidation and fear. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Drop the charges or more people get hurt." You can't protect everyone. That night, Keisha couldn't sleep. She lay awake thinking about Shanice's 8-year-old son, about Carlos's daughter being followed, about all the people who had found courage to speak truth and were now paying the price. Was justice worth this cost? But just as the darkness seemed overwhelming, an unexpected light appeared. The next morning, March 13th, Linda called with news that would change everything. "Dr. Reynolds, turn on CNN, right now." On screen, a press conference was underway. But it wasn't Brad's team or his supporters. It was a coalition Keisha had never expected, and they were about to turn the tide of battle. The CNN broadcast showed something unprecedented in corporate America. 12 CEOs standing together at a single podium, representing some of the largest hospitality companies in the nation. Angela Morrison, CEO of Meridian Hotels, Pacific Luxury's biggest competitor, stood at the microphone with quiet authority. "We stand with Dr. Keisha Reynolds. What happened at the Grandeur Pacific could have happened at any of our properties, and that should terrify every single one of us." She gestured to the executives beside her. "Together, our companies employ over 400,000 people across this country. Today, we're announcing the Hospitality Equity Alliance, a unified commitment to ending discrimination in our industry." Robert Chen, CEO of Coastal Resorts, stepped forward. "We're not competitors today, we're allies in change. Each of our companies is committing $10 million to an independent fund for discrimination victims, mandatory bias training for all management staff, and anonymous reporting systems that bypass local management." Keisha watched in her office, tears streaming down her face. She'd been fighting alone, and suddenly she had an army. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus Thornton's own daughter stepped up to the microphone. "My name is Rebecca Thornton," the young black woman said, her voice steady despite visible emotion. "My father, Marcus Thornton, has been funding Brad Whitmore's defense. But what my father doesn't know is that I experienced exactly what Dr. Reynolds experienced." The press corps erupted with questions, but Rebecca continued. "3 years ago, I worked at a luxury hotel in Boston. My manager told me my natural hair was unprofessional and gave me an ultimatum: straighten it or lose my job. I was 22 years old and needed the income, so I straightened it. I chemically burned my scalp, damaged my hair permanently, and sacrificed part of my identity because someone in power decided I didn't look right." She looked directly into the camera. "Dad, I never told you because I was ashamed, but I'm not ashamed anymore. What Brad Whitmore did to Dr. Reynolds is what your money is defending. I'm asking you publicly, is this really the legacy you want?" Chalkulearn. Video went viral within minutes, racking up millions of views. By noon, Marcus Thornton had issued a statement withdrawing all financial support from Brad's legal defense and pledging $5 million to the Hospitality Equity Alliance. The tide was turning. On March 15th, 1 week after the lobby incident, Brad Whitmore's criminal trial began in San Francisco Superior Court. The courthouse was surrounded by protesters, news vans, and observers who had traveled from across the country to witness justice. Judge Helen Martinez presided over a courtroom packed to capacity. Brad sat at the defense table looking gaunt and hollow, a shadow of the confident man who had wielded scissors just days earlier. The prosecution's case was devastating in its simplicity. They didn't need complex legal arguments when they had video from 17 different angles showing Brad cutting Keisha's hair without consent while she sat perfectly still. Assistant District Attorney Marcus Williams addressed the jury in his opening statement. "This case is not complicated. You will see clear video evidence of assault. You will hear from dozens of witnesses who watched it happen. You will hear the defendant's own words admitting he cut Dr. Reynolds' hair. The only question you must answer is, should a person face consequences for committing assault?" Brad's attorney, Jonathan Baxter, tried to paint his client as a victim of entrapment and social media outrage, but the evidence was insurmountable. Keisha took the witness stand on the second day of trial. She wore a professional navy suit, her hair now professionally styled to work with the uneven braids Brad had left her with. "Dr. Reynolds," Prosecutor Williams asked, "why did you allow Mr. Whitmore to cut your hair?" "Because I needed the world to see what happens when someone with power believes they can violate another person's dignity without consequences," Keisha replied calmly. "I knew that if I revealed my identity before he acted, he would never show his true character. People like Mr. Whitmore are very good at hiding their prejudice when they think someone important is watching. Were you afraid?" "Terrified. But more afraid of staying silent and allowing the system that enabled him to continue harming people who didn't have the power to fight back." The defense's cross-examination was brutal, but ineffective. Baxter tried to paint Keisha as vindictive and deceptive, but she remained composed, answering every question with quiet dignity. Then came testimony that sealed Brad's fate. His own words. The prosecution played the recording that Brad's former attorney had provided, the one where attorney-client privilege had been broken due to ongoing criminal activity. Brad's voice filled the courtroom. "I've been doing this for years. You maintain standards by making sure certain people know their place. I kept the numbers up so the corporate looked the other way. It's all about optics. Appear diverse on paper, but keep the real guest-facing positions for people who fit the image." The jury's faces showed disgust and disbelief. Several members shook their heads. When asked about the recording, Brad took the stand in his own defense, against his attorney's advice, and tried to claim the recording was taken out of context. Dr. Reynolds set this entire situation up, Brad insisted. She came to my hotel specifically to entrap me. Everything I did was taken in the worst possible light. I was just trying to maintain professional standards. Professional standards that involved cutting someone's hair without their consent? The prosecutor interrupted. She was in my lobby, using our facilities, and her appearance. Her appearance as a black woman with natural hair bothered you? That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying, Mr. Whitmore? That there's an acceptable context for physically assaulting someone? Brad stammered and fumbled, digging himself deeper with every word. By the time he left the stand, even his own attorney looked defeated. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood with the verdict form. On the charge of assault and battery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of violation of civil rights under California law, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of criminal harassment, we find the defendant guilty. Brad's face crumpled. His wife, sitting in the gallery, sobbed into her hands before standing and walking out without looking back at him. Judge Martinez scheduled sentencing for 1 week later. On March 22nd, the courtroom was once again packed for Brad Whitmore's sentencing hearing. Before the judge imposed sentence, victims were given the opportunity to address the court. Shanice Johnson stood at the podium, her voice strong despite her tears. Brad Whitmore told me I needed to hide who I was to keep my job. He made me feel ashamed of my hair, my appearance, my very existence. But I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm a 42-year-old woman who wasted 3 years believing I wasn't good enough because a racist man had power over my livelihood. Darnell Williams spoke next. I have a degree from Cornell, 6 years of excellent performance reviews. I was passed over for promotion 4 times while less qualified white employees moved up. Brad Whitmore didn't just hurt me. He stole opportunities from my family, my future, my children's future. One by one, 12 victims spoke. Each story was different, but the pattern was identical. Brad had systematically used his power to demean, discriminate, and destroy people who didn't fit his narrow vision of what professional looked like. Finally, Keisha approached the podium. Your Honor, I came to that hotel as a CEO, conducting oversight of my company. But what happened to me happens to black women every single day in workplaces across this country. We're told our hair is unprofessional. Our appearance is threatening. Our very presence is somehow wrong. Brad Whitmore felt entitled to physically alter my body because he viewed me as less than human. She paused, her voice steady. But this case was never just about me. It's about Shanice, Darnell, Jennifer, Carlos, and thousands of other workers who deserve dignity in their workplace. I don't want Brad Whitmore destroyed. I want him to understand the harm he caused and to ensure this never happens again. Judge Martinez listened to every word, then delivered her sentence with unwavering authority. Mr. Whitmore, you were in a position of trust and authority. You used that position not to serve your employees and guests, but to enforce your own prejudices. You violated Dr. Reynolds' bodily autonomy, discriminated against countless employees, and showed no remorse until you faced consequences. She looked directly at Brad. I sentence you to 3 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You are permanently barred from holding any management position in the hospitality industry. You will pay $750,000 in restitution to the victims of your discrimination, and you will complete 500 hours of community service, working with organizations that combat discrimination. Brad sagged in his chair as federal marshals approached to take him into custody. As the handcuffs closed around his wrists, he looked at Keisha one final time, not with hatred, but with the hollow realization of a man who had destroyed his own life. 6 months later, the Grandeur Pacific Hotel looked transformed. The lobby still gleamed with marble and crystal, but something fundamental had changed in its atmosphere. Jennifer. Chen wore a name tag that read General Manager, a promotion she'd earned through a transparent process with oversight from corporate HR. Carlos Mendoza had been promoted to Director of Security. Darnell Williams was now Assistant General Manager. The staff reflected the diversity of San Francisco itself, with management positions filled by people of all backgrounds. Anonymous suggestion boxes had been replaced with a third-party reporting system that sent complaints directly to corporate HR, bypassing local management entirely. Keisha visited on a sunny September morning, her hair styled in beautiful goddess locks that fell to her shoulders. She walked through the lobby unrecognized by most guests, observing the flow of operations. A young black woman sat in the same chair where Keisha had been humiliated, working on her laptop, her natural hair styled in an elaborate twist-out. No one approached her. No one questioned her presence. She was simply another guest, welcomed and respected. Keisha smiled. The Hospitality Equity Alliance had grown to include 47 companies representing over 1 million workers. Industry-wide standards for discrimination reporting had been adopted. 15 states had passed legislation strengthening protections for hospitality workers. Pacific Luxury Hotels had implemented sweeping reforms. All management hiring now required diverse interview panels, mandatory quarterly bias training with independent assessment, pay equity audits conducted by external firms. 50 million victim compensation fund for past discrimination, anonymous hotline with guaranteed investigation. The changes rippled across the entire industry. Hotel workers who had suffered in silence for decades were finding their voices, demanding dignity, winning protections that once seemed impossible. Keisha's phone buzzed with a news alert. Former hotel manager Brad Whitmore released to halfway house after serving 18 months. She read the brief article. Brad had served half his sentence with good behavior. He was now working in the kitchen of a homeless shelter, required community service that would last another year. His wife had divorced him. His adult children had cut off contact. The man who once held absolute power now lived in a shared room and rode the bus to his minimum wage job. Keisha felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a quiet acknowledgement that consequences had finally caught up with actions. Her real satisfaction came from an email she received that afternoon. Dr. Reynolds, I wanted you to know that I just accepted a front desk manager position at a hotel in Oakland. It's the first time in my career that I've walked into an interview and not worried about whether my locks would cost me the job. Thank you for making it possible for people like me to exist in these spaces without hiding who we are. Shanice Johnson. That evening, Keisha stood in her office overlooking the San Francisco skyline. On her wall hung a framed photograph of her father, Marcus Reynolds, the man who had built their company from nothing and taught her that business success meant nothing without human dignity. We did it, Dad, she whispered. We changed the system. Her phone rang. Linda Martinez. Dr. Reynolds, we just got word that Congress is holding hearings on workplace discrimination in the hospitality industry. They want you to testify, Keisha smiled. Schedule it. This fight isn't over. It's just beginning. The video of Brad cutting her hair had been viewed over 100 million times worldwide. It had become a case study in business schools, a reference point in discrimination law, a catalyst for change that had swept through an entire industry. What started with scissors and hatred had become a movement for dignity and justice. Brad Whitmore would be forgotten in time, a footnote in a larger story. But the women and men who found their courage, who spoke their truth, who demanded to be seen as fully human, their legacy would endure. Justice, Keisha had learned, wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about transforming the systems that made injustice possible in the first place, and that work would continue. One hotel, one workplace, one human interaction at a time, until dignity became the standard rather than the exception. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, they were winning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.